China's like the neighbor who walks on everyone's lawns, steals packages, and doesn't hesitate to loan its neighbors money, so long as the repayment includes your firstborn child. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Are you an experienced journalist? Do you know lots and lots about China? Would you like to write for China Uncensored? Because we're hiring. More info in the link below, or go to chinauncensored.tv/jobs. So if history has taught us anything, it's that bullies will keep being bullies as long as they keep getting away with it. Case in point, China. It's the biggest bully on the block, and the reason it continues to be a bully is because no one is seriously challenging it. You know how China likes to shoot water cannons at the Philippines when they try to take supplies to their sailors on this rusty old hull in the South China Sea? Well, technically, China has agreed not to. But the reason China keeps doing it is because back in 2012, China and the Philippines got into a little standoff within the Philippines exclusive economic zone. The Philippines backed off per their agreement, but China stayed, and it has acted like it owns the place ever since. That little standoff has not only come back to haunt the Philippines, but also most of its neighbors. You see, China claims almost the entire South China Sea as its own. For years, it used to have this 9-dash line to delineate what it thinks its territory is, and it actively polices the area as if it owned it. But according to an international tribunal that studied the issue for years, China's claims are bunk. Most of the South China Sea actually falls under the control of its neighbors, an inconvenient truth China has refused to acknowledge. So what gives? Well, since that standoff in 2012, not a whole lot has changed. China still acts like it owns the place. And because there hasn't been significant pushback, it's now built up and militarized several islands in the South China Sea that don't belong to it. You may be thinking, why don't all those countries just band together and confront China? Well, that's a very good question, and I wish I had an easy answer. There is actually a body that ties all these countries together. It's called ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It includes all the countries that China is encroaching upon in the South China Sea, plus a few others, which I'll talk about in a bit because they're important. Now, I'm not saying ASEAN hasn't done anything to confront China. For years, it's been putting out joint statements with language about the importance of maintaining and promoting peace, security, stability in the South China Sea. Basically, Diplo speak for cut it out, China, you're acting like a toddler. It also got China to sign to this code of conduct for the South China Sea, which, believe it or not, says the parties concerned undertake to resolve their territorial and jurisdictional disputes by peaceful means. Yes, very peaceful. It's like a shower of love cascading over this Filipino fisheries boat. And all the damage it did, well, that's just China's version of a love bite. Now, the reason that China's happy to sign on to something like this is pretty simple. It's non-binding. China seems happy to sign whatever piece of paper ASEAN puts in front of it as long as there's, no actual enforcement mechanism. And it's also happy to talk until it's blue in the face about updating said code of conduct, as long as it doesn't actually have to change its behavior. Here's China just last year meeting with ASEAN members about updating the code of conduct. Ah, look at them, what a happy little family. But it hasn't been just all talk with ASEAN. Last year, for the first time, all 10 ASEAN countries participated in joint military drills. Singapore's defense ministry said the exercises were about building stable military-to-military relations to promote regional peace and stability, which you can't hear without thinking it's at least in part about defending the bloc from China. But all this joint ASEAN military activity was under the chairmanship of Indonesia, which has an invested interest in countering China militarily. That's because China has been encroaching on waters near Indonesia's Natuna Islands, which are rich fishing grounds. And encroaching not just a few times, but regularly, for years. Fishing boats accompanied by China Coast Guard vessels began appearing in nearby waters in the 2010s, as China ramped up its maritime activity in the region. And last year, China released a new 10-dash line map that showed what it considers to be its territorial waters. The Natuna Islands weren't explicitly inside the 10-dash line, but it certainly overlapped with Indonesia's exclusive economic zone, which is up to 200 nautical miles from a country's coastline. The joint military exercises were initially going to be in the South China Sea, but it was moved to the Natuna Islands after Cambodia objected. I'll talk more about Cambodia later. So obviously, that motivated Indonesia to make ASEAN a force for China to reckon with. But Indonesia only has the chairmanship for 1 year, and this year, Laos is in charge. This could really shake things up, not only because Laos is a landlocked country that shares a border with China and doesn't have any claims in the South China Sea, but also because it's massively dependent on China. That has many wondering if this will affect ASEAN's unity, not only over the military conflict spilling over from Myanmar, but also China's aggression in the South China Sea. More on Laos being a simp for China after the break. Welcome back. So last year it looked like ASEAN was finally coming together to stand up to China. But this year, with Laos in the controller's seat, a lot of analysts predict progress on that front is going to be slow, if it continues at all. Like I mentioned before, Laos doesn't have any claims in the South China Sea because it's completely landlocked. But another reason why it's unlikely to tackle such a thorny issue is its massive debt to China. It borrowed $1.9 billion from China to build a railway from China to its capital, and Chinese state-owned enterprises now own 70% of it. As if that weren't bad enough, Laos is totally reliant on China for its power. Back in 2022, Laos' national security company signed a contract with Chinese state-owned China Southern Power Grid Company to build hydro plants and maintain its power grid. Together, they created this joint company that the China Southern Power Grid Company has majority shares in. A Laos Energy Ministry official said the new company would build, manage, and control the Lao power grid for 25 years, after which it would be handed over to the Lao government. In case you didn't catch that, Laos basically just handed its power grid over to China for 25 years. If I were Laos' shrink, I would say you really need to overcome this codependency. Back in 2021, Chinese state media quoted a Laotian official as saying that China was the largest foreign investor in Laos, with 813 projects worth over $16 billion. Now that may sound like a good thing, usually foreign investment is. But in this case, the debt burden that's placed on Laos has been crushing. Last year, the World Bank said that Laos' total debt was equal to 125% of its GDP. That means all the goods and services the entire country produces each year, not just what the government has to spend, is worth less than all the public debt the Laotian government has taken on. And of that debt, the World Bank estimates that about half of it is owed to China. It's so bad that if China hadn't deferred some $2 billion in debt repayments between 2020 and 2023, Laos would be in bankruptcy territory right now. If I were Laos' financial advisor, well, I probably wouldn't be in business anymore. So besides being massively in debt to China, being totally reliant on China for its energy, and sharing a border with China, China is also Laos' second largest trading partner. Maybe because of that, Laos has shown a willingness to side with China on sticky international issues. Issues like the CCP taking over Hong Kong. Despite promising that it wouldn't for at least another 2 decades. Laos was one of 53 countries that backed China on its takeover of Hong Kong. Which, let's be honest, was probably out of hope that if it supported China in this, Laos wouldn't be next. China seems to have boundary issues when it comes to its neighbors' territory, if you know what I mean. Laos also didn't condemn China's 10-line map, which understandably upset a lot of its neighbors. And remember how I talked about ASEAN countries finally holding military drills together last year? Well, about a month after Laos took part in that, it also joined China and 3 other ASEAN members for joint military exercises. In China, no less. Now, those were supposedly counter-terrorism exercises they were doing. But you don't do drills with countries you consider your enemy, so I would say that's a pretty clear indication of how Laos sees its neighbors to the north. So what does all this mean for ASEAN in 2024? Well, Laos has set the agenda for its chairmanship this year, and it says it wants to focus on enhancing connectivity and resilience, which doesn't sound a lot like challenging China. Laos foreign minister, who's now the chair of ASEAN, acknowledged last year in a presentation that the South China Sea is going to be one of ASEAN's challenges this year. But nowhere in his list of priorities did it talk about ironing out the South China Sea issue. Unless you count him talking about cooperation to maintain peace, stability, and development. So does Laos taking the reins at ASEAN mean ASEAN is going to get weaker on China? Well, many seem to think so. Diplomatic sources from 3 countries in ASEAN told Nikkei Asia that China's financial lifeline will be crucial if Laos is to ride out this year's high point in its diplomacy. Another analyst said that Beijing might not need to push hard since Laos would automatically look up to its mutual benefit with China beyond ASEAN's collective interest. Stratfor, a geopolitical intelligence firm, predicted that Laos' indebtedness to China will impede any efforts to resume negotiations over competing maritime claims in the South China Sea. So yeah, expectations aren't high. But one silver lining, if you can even call it that, Laos at least doesn't have the worst track record when it comes to China. Back in 2012, when Cambodia was the chair, the year China was in that big standoff with the Philippines, Cambodia completely failed to get ASEAN to issue a joint statement on the issue. At least when Laos was last the ASEAN chair in 2016, it was able to get consensus on a generic statement saying that maintaining peace and stability in the South China Sea region serves the fundamental interests of ASEAN member states and China, as well as the international community. Okay, so that shouldn't be a high bar. But with how compromised Laos is now regarding China, that might be the best we can hope for. But one thing's for certain. The South China Sea issue isn't going away. The Philippines recently said it was planning to start building up its islands in the South China Sea so it can put troops on them. And if there's one thing China can't stand in the South China Sea, it's having company. Now I have a video I want to show you, but first, China Uncensored wouldn't be possible without what I call the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army, fans who support the show on Patreon. Help us keep the lights on and the show going by pledging as little as $1 an episode. You can even set a monthly limit. As a thank you, I'll answer their questions at the end of these episodes. Today's question comes from Alan Nolet. Hi, Chris and everyone else at China Uncensored. Thank you for all you do. Question. Xi Jinping is 70 years old. His daughter is obviously not going to step into his shoes, so what do you think his succession plan might be? That's a great question. I've never heard that before. Xi Jinping clearly has no plans to step down from power. But he can't live forever, a fact I'm sure a lot of people are happy about. But who comes next? Xi was basically the first leader of the CCP that wasn't just appointed by the paramount leader of the party, Deng Xiaoping. He got the job because of high-level power struggles going on between the previous leader, Hu Jintao, and the leader before him, Jiang Zemin. So if Xi manages to keep his grip on power, likely he will basically appoint someone to take over after him. He will be given the veneer of the party electing the new leader, but it will be clear he was appointed by Xi. If Xi gets purged or assassinated, the most dominant political faction will appoint the next guy. If Xi just dies before any of that happens, it'll be pure chaos, as so many different factions vie to put their guy in the top space. The party might not survive something like that. You could see a military coup. There could even be a military coup any day now. What happens after Xi is totally up in the air right now, which is kind of a scary thought. Thanks for your question, Alan. And since YouTube doesn't like me talking about topics the algorithm considers too sensitive, I've begun hiding these conversations in videos about gaming on my new show, Deep Thoughts While Gaming. Help me beat the algorithm by clicking on this video and let me know what you think. And hit that orange button to support China Uncensored on Patreon. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.